Thank you all for being here, and I apologize for running a little bit late. I had to do my makeup, and it's really a mess for me with this bald head and the glow. So welcome to the College of Charleston. My name is Heath Hoffman. I'm a professor of sociology here, and so on behalf of our amazing students, staff, and faculty, welcome to our wonderful campus. I know that a lot of you are students, and some of you are from Charleston, so it's not much of a welcome, but we are happy to have you here. And I am really grateful for this opportunity to talk with Mandy Matney. I'm a big fan, and I've watched all the episodes or listened to all the episodes of her various podcasts, and so this is really a fantastic opportunity for me, and I'm grateful to you all for being here. A few housekeeping items. As you know, if you're a listener of Mandy's many podcasts, she is oftentimes the target of trolls and sexist comments, and that will not be tolerated here today. So this is the only heavy-handed comment I'm going to make. We're here to have fun. I want this to be a positive experience for you all, but also for Mandy, who has done a lot of work and taken a lot to cover the Murdocks and to get to this point. And so if there are any disruptions, we'll ask you to leave. If you won't leave, then we'll have the campus police escort you. So let's just not have that happen, and we'll have a fantastic time here together. So this event is being streamed through 2 separate feeds. So to our thousands of visitors out there who are watching us virtually, hello, thank you for joining us. Some are watching through the college's YouTube event channel, and then there is a separate feed going out to the Luna Shark Productions Premier subscribers, and so welcome to those folks. If you see the QR code here, it might be hard for you to access it from where you're sitting, but that is a way for you to join the Luna Shark Premium subscribers to see what they're chatting about as I'm talking with Mandy up here. So, but if you can't join the premium subscribers, it's okay, because Mandy Matney is right here in front of you. So let's officially and just join me in thanking Mandy for being here and welcoming her to the stage. So thank you, Mandy. So we did place note cards in front of each of you, and so there will be a question and answer period near the end of the event. If you have questions you'd like to have asked of Mandy, please write those questions using your best handwriting possible. And pass those towards the end, and I've got a few folks who are going to pick those up later in the event, bring them up here, and then we'll read as many as we can, time permitting. So please don't hesitate to write out any questions that we don't address in our conversation. So Mandy, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's here. I'm really excited.
It's really fantastic. So I wanted to start off asking if you would talk a little bit about how you got started in journalism and what led you, your career winding path to covering the low country of South Carolina.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, I'm Mandy. Nice to meet y'all. I started my career out went to the University of Kansas, went to journalism school, and I was telling you that I was interested in sociology in college, actually. And that was my minor. My major was journalism, and all throughout college, everybody pretty much told me, you're not gonna make it in journalism. Journalism is not the smartest thing in the world to do. Am I going in and out?
It did go in and out.
I think I'm.
Is there?
Swipe up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. David's my audio guy, and there's my husband. Yay, David. But I'm used to him telling me whether or not he can hear me. I keep looking at him, like, no, I do. Yeah, so was interested in sociology, and I was just thinking about this today. I was at a crossroads at my senior year, as so many college kids are, of like, I love my major, but what am I gonna do with it?
Yep.
Journalism at the time, I graduated in 2012, and newspapers were still really understanding the online thing. Newspapers were either shutting down or decreasing their staffs across the nation. It was pretty much like, don't go into newspaper journalism. But I did. I found a job at a tiny, tiny newspaper, and I'm going out again.
You did go out again.
Okay.
Maybe try a handheld instead. Apologies for that.
Oh, it's okay.
Check, check.
It's okay.
Thank you, Jesse.
No worries. I'm used to audio problems all the time. Okay, so I took my first job at a tiny newspaper in Waynesville, Missouri. It was a 5-day newspaper, but I only had 2 people on staff, and it was just pretty much me having to fill up the newspaper every day, which was a huge responsibility for a 22-year-old, and looking back on it, I have no idea why anybody gave me that responsibility. But I worked really hard, and I worked like 60-hour weeks at the time, and I loved it. There, I really learned the value of community journalism. And there, like, you would write a story about the sheriff, and he would literally be in your office the next day being like, hey, Mandy, rah, rah, rah. And, or you'd write about a criminal, and they would come in too. That happened too. Like, everybody was always, they would never call in Waynesville. They'd always just come to
Show up.
This is gonna happen a lot. And so I was a small town and moved to another small town of Danville, Illinois. Another small paper, same thing. Had too much responsibility for being as young as I was. But I loved it, and realized it was just I loved what I was doing in Danville, but it was too cold. So I moved the first and only winter that I stayed there. I was like just done with Illinois. So I sent off my resume to every newspaper in the Southeast pretty much, or a lot of them. And I was like, and anybody who was hiring, I applied and was like, I'll go anywhere. I just want to go somewhere warmer and want to be in newspapers. And then I ended up at the Island Packet, where I was for four years, I want to say. 2016, I ended up at the Island Packet. And then the boat crash happened in 2019, which got me into all of this. So from there, I worked for another online outlet, and then I started my own business and my own company, and I work for myself, which I love, Luna Shark Media, and we make podcasts every week.
Which is why we're all here, so
Yeah.
we're grateful for that. So I'm gonna jump into a heavy topic, and you have experienced, as I mentioned before, a lot of sexism. We'll hear it in a clip with Dick Harpootlian's own words, and a lot of trolls and negative comments and criticism. So why don't we listen to the clips first? Is that right, David? And then
I can, well, we have a fun video to play first.
I like the fun video.
Yeah. If we had music.
I'm so sick of them coming at me again. 'Cause if I was a man, then I'd be the man. I'd be the man. I'd be the man. I'd be the man. I'd be the man.
So, most of you probably know I'm a little obsessed with Taylor Swift. But this is my favorite song, one of my favorite songs by Taylor Swift, depending on the day, because it reminds us all of, even if you're Taylor Swift and even if you're on top of the world, you still stop and think about, if I was a man, would they be thinking of me in this way? And if I was a man, would they be asking me if I'm a real journalist? Would they be picking me apart in the way that they do? And usually the answer is no. But until, and I don't say that to complain by any means, I think that that's another trope that we fall into is you talk about sexism, and as soon as you do, people are like, you're just complaining. And no, we're just calling it like it is. Dads go to the park all the time, and they're suddenly dad of the year for just playing with their kid once a year. And
Disney dads.
and you know, but it exists in journalism, and it has existed throughout my entire career. I feel like I've had to work a lot harder because I'm a woman, and this case was no different in encountering sexism, especially online. I saw that immediately with the sound of my voice I had a vocal fry. And whatever, I didn't know what a vocal fry was. I really think, looking back, my voice was just very tired at the beginning of that time. And but the biggest probably moment that I had throughout this 4-year journey, that I realized that this whole sexism thing and fighting the good boys and fighting the good old boys, et cetera, it happened, unfortunately, and I hate this video. Like, I've only watched it a few times, but I feel like it's a good, David's like this? Oh. Okay. It hurts to watch this, but it was a moment for me that I was like, all these things in my head of thinking that I'm facing a lot of sexism and that everything would be different if I was a man. It's real because I wouldn't have experienced this.
How did Mandy Matney not do that?
Yeah, how did Mandy Matney not do that? Fish news? Fish news? Fish news.
Where's Fish News?
Didn't make it.
No, she don't. I don't know if
Does she really exist?
I don't know.
Is it will folks alter sexual ego? Could it be?
Well, that's what folks you never know. Very possible.
He may be coming out with a judge. Who knows?
Sorry.
So for those who don't know, this is one of Alex Murdaugh's and Alex, whatever the hell we call him, but Alex Murdaugh's defense lawyers, Dick Harpootlian, who's a very powerful state senator, referring to Mandy as Will Folks, alters sexual ego. Will Folks runs Fitz News. You used to work.
Previous boss, yes.
And so what struck me in listening to that initially when you played that on the podcast was that it was clear they knew who you were and they were worried about you. And that's why he's talking about you.
Right, and then he resulted to insulting me in a sexist comment instead of insulting my work, which is what sexist men do a lot of the times. I keep going in and out, and it's driving me crazy. I'm sorry.
So was the sexism you faced here when you started covering the Murdocks different from earlier in your career, or was it just more of the status quo? I mean, it feels like it might be different, but...
Yeah, I think I realized from this moment and lots of moments when I realized that Dick Harpootlian was actually afraid of me, and he was worried about me being there. He looked around the room and I wasn't there, and he wasn't looking for any other reporters because I was the only one calling him out at that time. But at the same time, that sexism that I faced in that moment and that horrible moment, not only from Dick Harpootlian, but those were my peers laughing at me in that room. Those were people I knew, and those were journalists laughing along with Dick Harpootlian like that. And that was the crushing part for me watching it, not only, and a woman was laughing with him, and that was what drove me crazy. But now I look back on that and I kind of got my power in that moment, because I was like, he's afraid of me, and that's a good thing. And they all can laugh at me all they want, but I'm gonna be the one doing the work, and I will be the one that will intimidate Dick Harpootlian. And so that is all to say that if we all have moments like this in our lives where you just feel horrible and you get put down in front of a room of people and it makes you feel like you're alone and it makes you feel like, well, maybe I'm the crazy one. But it can also, moments like this can also make you find your power and make you realize how much you have inside of you and how you can keep going.
It is something that I admire about you in that you seem to embrace the criticism, and instead of avoiding it, you kind of embrace it and say, this person said this, and kind of pointing to it, embracing it, and showing how ridiculous it is and unfair and sexist and trollist.
Yeah, I go in and out of phases of what I do with negative comments, and I was just talking to Jenny about this. Jenny's a fitness influencer, and she faces very similar things that I do. Love you, Jenny. And but speaking of, I've met a lot of really amazing women who I have, because I felt really alone when I started getting these horrible comments online and people making fun of my body, people making fun of everything I said, how I looked, people making fun of my dog, and that really bothered me. But because of that, I was able to meet just a lot of amazing women across the country who are dealing with the same thing, and like Jenny, and we reach out to each other all the time of like, this guy said this stupid thing. And I mean, it depends on the day of what I do with comments, but a lot of times people just say ignore it and move on. And that you just can't do that if you're a human being who cares. And I'm a human being who cares. I don't want people to hate me. I don't want people to wish horrible things for me. I don't want people to sit there and analyze my vocal fry all day. All of that makes me feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable. But you have to just, I've learned to do whatever, my rule has just been do whatever makes you feel better. And there's some comments that's like, I have a great comeback. I'm just gonna tweet it and call them out in that way. And then sometimes it's like, I don't wanna devote energy to that person. I'm just going to try my best to ignore it. But I think in general, people just need to realize that it's impossible to ignore it. If your inbox is full of things that people are saying, and for every negative comment, I get 100 nice ones. So I can't act like it's all hate, but I'm also the type of person that if I get 100 great reviews and one bad review, I'm just gonna focus on what I did bad and focus on that one review, and it's gonna stick in my head forever. And people say, get tougher skin.
Easier said than done.
Yeah, and I'm like, look at my messages right now. How would you feel if people were invading your life in this way? And I think a lot of people just don't stop to think about the invasiveness of it. And another thing that I've learned is I've turned off all notifications of all of my social media apps, because I've learned I can't live my life basically waiting for the next comment to come in that's gonna be mean and I'm gonna have to deal with it. And I can't wait my life, I can't keep allowing them to interrupt my life. So I've just learned little things like that to take control of the situation.
Well, and I think the common thread, or I think the takeaway is they're not criticizing your work. They're criticizing you or how you talk or how you look. I mean, it's your work
Typically, yeah.
is really good.
Well, thank you.
That's what brings you here.
Thank you.
And so you started investigating the Murdocks in 2019 after the boat crash when Mallory Beach was killed. And so I'm curious, was there something at that point, and this is a little off script, so bear with me for a sec, was there anything at that point that triggered for you that the Murdocks were something we're going to spend the next 3-4 years of your life on? Were there any red flags that, oh, this is big and I know I'm onto something here?
Yeah, lots of red flags. It was like a feeling in my stomach that I couldn't shake it. It was all I thought about. It was all I could think about. It was all I talked to Liz about. Liz and I we would do dinner after the packet, so many hours of just going to dinner with Liz and us talking about the Murdocks and everything that we learned about the Murdocks. I think from the very first day of the boat crash, we started hearing there's going to be a cover-up. This is a powerful family. And there was something about that stuck with me. And then the more we found out, the more horrifying rumors that we saw online and meeting with sources. And I remember meeting with a source, and I talk about this in my book, meeting with my first source from Hampton, and she was like, what I'm going to tell you is going to sound like a Netflix documentary. And that was before the murder.
And before the actual Netflix documentary.
Right. So I always knew there was something huge there. And during the pandemic, my husband and I actually toyed with the idea of having a podcast about the boat crash. And we made a little fake podcast and it was always like my pipe dream that I was like, I have all this time, I'm gonna make a podcast during the pandemic. I didn't, I just watched Netflix the whole time. But then as soon as the murders happened, we both looked at each other and we're like, now is the time. No one is gonna understand this story in the way that I do, and I need to tell this story, and a podcast is the way to do it. So we just kind of did it in that way.
So again, David, I'm sorry to go off script a little bit more, but I've listened, since you agreed to come here, I've listened to that very first podcast on June 22nd, 2021. I've listened to it about 6 times.
Oh, wow.
And the production value is certainly different from what you do today, but
It's
that's
not good.
there is an urgency in your voice that this is something really important and we need to be listening. Is that accurate? Is that how you felt when you were recording that?
Yeah. First of all, I was very mentally and physically exhausted at that time because I was on the phone with sources for 12 hours a day. And then after those 12 hours, my husband, David, very sweet, he knew what the goal was, and that was to get a podcast out. So he'd say, time to go to the kitchen table and try this podcast, and we'll do the script. And our first podcast, which was only 12 minutes, took us 60 hours to do. I keep bumping something, I'm so sorry. 60 hours, and I was so nervous, I couldn't even get through like a whole sentence. I would just say like the cat and then take a break, I don't know. And I couldn't get through full sentences, so it just took forever. And we had no idea with equipment. We had a very cheap microphone, and my husband, David, was figuring out how to edit audio. He didn't have a background in that, so it took us all a very long time, and it was very frustrating. So there was not only urgency, there was urgency because I felt like it was so important, and I was so tired because I was literally dedicating my entire life and every moment of my life to not only figuring out what happened in the murders, but being able to explain. I felt the urgency of getting the narrative straight because I felt it every day of June slipping further and further away from the truth in the national media. And I was like, somebody needs to explain to these people what actually is going on here.
So jumping forward, Alex Murdaugh has been indicted for murder. He's on trial. And I'm curious if there is a turning point in your coverage of the Murdocks, of the murder of Paul and Maggie, where you felt, aha, Alex did it. Alex did it. And I think we might have a clip. Is that right, David?
Yeah.
It's up to you.
Yeah. We will. So I talk about this in my book, and the investigation was always pointing to Alec. From day one, we knew it was within the family. All hints, all points were, with my best sources, everybody was pointing straight at Alex Murdaugh. But with bad sources and with like the gossip train in Hampton, the Hampton people would call me and give me a completely opposite story. So sometimes I would go down those rabbit holes. But I kept looking at Alec, and I kept saying like something is off with all these things. But the moment that the roadside shooting, we have to say that first, that totally, I knew that he had something to do with the murders there, and I was very much almost convinced that he absolutely did it then. But my moment was different from a lot of people. My moment was listening to the hundreds of jailhouse phone calls that we got through a Freedom of Information Act request, Liz's idea, brilliant. And I remember sitting there and just listening to phone call after phone call, and it's like, this man is not even pretending to be concerned about the murders of his wife and son. Something is really, really wrong here. And I would listen to him manipulate his family, and I would listen to him. I just got like an insight. Through those phone calls, I was able to learn so much about who he was and what he cared about. And it was not solving the murders of his wife and son, which I don't know why that did not make any sense to me. But we're going to play a few of those jailhouse phone calls. A little loud.
Hello, this is an MTEL operator calling from Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center with a prepaid collect call from Alex. To accept this prepaid collect call, press 1. All phone calls are subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using MTEL.
I don't know what we expected Alec Murdaugh's jailhouse phone calls to be like, but after listening to them, we are more certain than ever of Alec's extraordinary ability to manipulate and control those around him, even his own family. My name is Mandy Matney. I've been investigating the Murdaugh family for 3 years now. This is the Murdaugh Murders Podcast with David Moses and Liz Farrell.
Hey, Buck, I meant to ask you, did Netflix put something out about all this?
Is there a show on Netflix about all this? I don't think so. The only things that have been released is Oxygen, something called Oxygen True Crime, and then the ABC 2020 series was released.
Series? What series?
An episode. Like an hour and a half episode.
I got you. Somebody just told me that. Somebody told me Netflix was in the Hampton. Okay. Anyway, all right. I was just curious. I love you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Hey, Bud.
Hey.
What you doing?
Nothing. I'm in bed in Charlotte.
Am I waking you up?
No, it's not. It's only 9 o'clock.
What? It's 9 o'clock?
Yeah.
Hey, I hit 9 out of 11 games on Sunday on the pro games.
Well,
I'm just the Eagles, and I'm just the Steelers. The Eagles were 3.5-point favorites over the Giants, and they lost. And the Steelers were 4.5-point underdogs to the Bengals, and they lost by 20. But I hit 9 out of 11. That's pretty damn hard.
Yeah.
I won like 6 soups, 4 beef sticks, a bunch of crackers, some cookies, a bunch of canteen shit.
Well, that's good.
There was like 13 of us playing. Everybody put in something,
Right.
I won 13 things. So, anyway, how you doing?
Yeah. So,
Speaks volumes.
yeah, imagine all of us sitting there for the first time on the edge of our seats, like waiting to hear anything, waiting to hear him say, what about the investigation? Waiting to him to say, why am I in here? This is so wrong. But no, it was beef sticks. And y'all didn't hear the full, we never released all of the phone calls because of the whole lawsuit with Dick and Jim, of them trying to get them not released. And we were very careful about the calls that we did publish weren't just published for entertainment value. Yeah. We had some sort of context around them. They had to be a news aspect to it. But there was hours and hours of him talking about working out, and
rigorous exercise regimen that he.
horrible. I mean, and that was a very mentally low time of my life, and there's no worse hell that you could put me in versus listening to Alex Murdaugh's phone calls with his family talking about himself and working out for hours and hours. But I had to do it because I was trying to figure him out, and during that time, and again, I think it's very natural that a lot of people don't want to accept that he murdered his wife and son because he looks like a lot of people's dads, and he looks like a guy who might not be capable of that. And it's just a horrible, horrible thing to imagine that somebody could be capable of doing something like that to their own family. And while I was always suspicious of Alex, I didn't necessarily want it to be him. I was trying to just make it make sense, and I was trying to understand why and the how, but in that process, I didn't want him to do it. I don't think, if that makes sense, because it's just such a horrible thing. And it would have made more sense to me for him to at least hire somebody to do it. But that's not what happened, and that's not what the evidence showed. And so that was my long journey of figuring out that Alex Murdaugh did it, which that's also on top of a bunch of evidence.
Well, speaking of how hard it is to imagine him doing it, I mean, his own brother, after Alec was convicted, was interviewed for the New York Times, and he said, I don't think my brother did it. It's hard to believe my brother would do it, but, and I quote Randy, Alec's brother, Alex, quote, knows more than what he's saying. He's not telling the truth, in my opinion, about everything there. So even his own brother is like, I don't think you did it, but Alec knows more than what he's saying. So I'm curious for you, and whatever you're comfortable speaking to this point, do you have an opinion about whether Alec killed them by himself or had accomplices?
I think he had accomplices, but in different ways. I think I do not believe that he was the only one who knew that night that he murdered them. And I believe that he had accomplices that not necessarily like hitmen or just people to help him clean up his little messes, that also people like Corey Fleming were accomplices in certain ways because they knew that he was doing bad things for years. He knew that Alex, a lot of people around him knew that Alex was a ticking time bomb and that something horrible was going to happen. And I think a lot of people in the system were accomplices in certain ways that not necessarily they were like cleaning up blood on the murder scene, but I think that they knew and didn't do or say anything about it, and that's horrible too.
Like hundreds of thousands of dollars in overdraft fees. Sorry. The overdraft fees being forgiven by Palmetto State Bank. Which is something that we get that kind of service too.
Yeah, nobody gets that. That was so insane, and that was another thing where they tried to normalize it of like, oh, it's just here and there, you go negative $300,000 in your bank account.
I mean, who doesn't? I mean, come on, really.
Right, but that's another thing that I'm glad that I have a background that's not in that world because people like Dick and Jim don't understand, and they don't know anybody who's ever overdrafted in a bank account and how that works, and how a lot of people get arrested for bad checks and things. And that's what made me so mad was that, like, I mean, we could have charges, I think, forever, like a month of charges against Alex for the rest of eternity, for other little things that he has done that is illegal. And a lot of people think like the government's really laying it on him. I think he could have 1,000 charges at this point, but there does have to be a stopping point at some time. And I hope that we get there.
So he's been convicted, he's now in state prison, there are certainly other proceedings going on. But I just want to go back to you, reflecting back on that first podcast at your kitchen table in 2021. What have you learned since then that you wish you knew before you recorded that podcast in 2021? You've been through a lot.
Yeah, I have changed a lot. I've grown a lot. I didn't realize at the time, but because it was so imperfect, I think that pulled a lot of audience toward us, and I think a lot of people could relate to me, and I would have edited that thing for months and months to make it perfect, to make it sound better, to make it, but like you said, there was that urgency in my voice of, like, I don't care, I just gotta get this out. But I'm so glad I did, because of that, the journey, our podcast listeners can hear the growth in my voice, and they can hear David improving on audio, and they can hear me gaining confidence in myself, and me gaining confidence in the things that I'm saying, and my journalism skills improving, and all of those things. And so I think one thing that I wish I knew is that you do not by any means have to be perfect to do something to create a lot of change. And you do not have, like, there will always be haters, there will always be people out there that will make fun of you no matter what, and they don't matter. You can do something huge and it won't sound perfect, and you just have to learn how to be okay with that and just roll on and learn from it.
As Eric Bland, I think, has said on the Cup of Justice a number of times, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, because of that, we got shocking success. Cup of Justice and Murdaugh Murders podcast were both #1 on Apple. In my wildest dreams, couldn't imagine #1 on any platform whatsoever, because celebrities all have podcasts, and big, huge companies all have podcasts, and all these intimidating giant media figures have podcasts. And I didn't even set out to compete against them, because I didn't feel like I belonged in that league whatsoever. But I think the lesson there is just to try and see what happens. And I think that's the beauty of our society now, that you don't have to be a big media company. You just have to be able to tell a story and put it out there. And if it's good, people will latch on, and they did. And I was very encouraged by the fan base that we developed back in 2021, and I'm just very thankful that I'm thankful, for all of you all. Seriously, I love our fans, because they sat through the imperfect episodes, and it's funny, like, I have not listened to episode 1 in a really long time.
It's good.
Because, I mean, it's good in its own way, right? Like, but it's hard for me to listen to it, because I'm very critical of myself. But I'm so proud of it, and I would never want to go back. Some people suggested going back and, like, retweaking and redoing the first episode. And David and I were like, no, I want people to go along with the journey, and I want people to see, like, how imperfect it was at the beginning. And then within 9 episodes, we became #1. That's insane. So I hope that inspires people.
Well, I remember somebody referred to Murdaugh Murders podcast as true crime, and I was like, it's not true crime, it's journalism. Like, it seemed like there was a difference there to me. And what struck me, you seem so different than, like, Dateline. It's not just the money and the resources, like, you're doing journalism. And so one thing I was curious about from your vantage point, looking back, what are some of the examples of your coverage of the Murdocks that you feel exemplify the kind of good journalism that you and Liz have been committed to producing?
So, I think David has a slide. Everything that we've done with the Freedom of Information Act, I'm really proud of, and I'm really proud of. There are hundreds of thousands of people around the country that now know what FOIA is and will make FOIA jokes, and I think that's amazing, because I'm a nerd when it comes down to it. And I think it's so important for people to have tools to be able to check out their government and make sure their government is doing the right thing. And I think a lot of people, some journalists like don't want the all citizens to know about FOIA and all the things that we are capable of finding out about our government. But a couple examples of coverage with FOIA, and I don't think a lot of people realize this, but we were really moving the investigation along with our FOIA request. Like, I was the reason why we got the 911 call for Gloria Satterfield's death, because I filed a bunch of FOIA requests with SLED, and I was very pesky about it. And I kept calling them saying, I need this, you gotta put this 911 call out about this. And they released it to all of the media at the same time, but I was like, I was the one, I knew, and I gave myself a little pat on the back. But things like that not only kept the pressure up, but kept people interested on the case and kept the spotlight on the case. And I'm very proud that with our approach of putting the victims first in their stories and not being a gross true crime that just takes people's pain and makes money off of it, we very much cared about the victims and their stories and made sure our listeners did too. And I was proud that we showed that that's possible, that there is an audience out there for something like that you don't have to be so gross. You can make jokes about FOIA and you can entertain your audience and keep them there and also have them learn something. But there will be an audience. You just don't have to resort to being salacious and not having any journalism in your product. Like, I'm proud that our podcast has real journalism and that we have sources, and I'm proud of the whole thing.
In your story, yes. And I think, I was talking with David the other day, and you are a great storyteller, and I felt like during the trial, your podcast was providing Creighton Waters with a narrative that kind of put things together like that. Like, it was making sense to me, and I was like, God, I hope Creighton's listening to this. And but that's a side note. But the quality stuff that really I did think make its way into the courtroom in some way. So, I mean, you've kind of touched on this a little bit. What are some of the highs and lows of this whole journey for you? I mean, I hope this is one of the highs. You get to see your fans in person, and we're celebrating you.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm nervous. I'm an introvert, and in the last couple years, I really don't leave my house a whole lot. I work from home. My husband's there. I have a few friends who come over every once in a while, but I'm not used to things like this. So I'm warming up to seeing people in person, and I'm really excited about that. And I love to hear, the amount of times that, like, we were in Mexico earlier this year and saw a fan at the Cancun airport. We were in Texas and ran into a fan. Like, that is the most overwhelmingly humbling thing in the whole world, and it's my voice that's out there, it's not my face. So when people see my face, they're like pretty much a big fan. And it's just, it's incredible. And so that part has been great. Any sort of wins that we've gotten for victims has been huge. Any wins that you hear that victims get either money back or just reassurance, and they know that validation, really. I think justice comes in a lot of forms, and I think, like, for Sandy Smith, the Smith case is the best and worst part of this whole journey, I think, for me, because it was probably one of the best highs in the world when Sandy called me and told me they were reopening the investigation into Stephen's death, and we both cried. But the low point is that every day I think about it's still not solved, and what can I do, and what are we missing here, and how is it not solved, and sometimes I question with myself, like, did I drag Sandy into this chaos? with my peskiness and with getting Stephen's story out there. But Sandy has received, on the other side of that, Sandy has received support from around the world, and she knows that there's moms around the world who love her and support her, and she is fine. When I met her, she was just so broken, and she didn't believe that anybody believed her, and I didn't blame her for not accepting the Highway Patrol's theory of Stephen's death. And now she's this confident woman who's like, yeah, I know that that was wrong. And I'm seeing her on Dateline, and I'm seeing her on all the shows be so confident. And so that's a huge high for me, just to see. I want her to get justice, and I believe that she will, but I think Sandy Smith is in a better place now because of what our audience has shown her, which is love, respect, validation, and I'm proud of that.
And Stephen Smith's legacy will live on through the scholarship that has been established in his name.
The scholarship in the, like Gloria Satterfield has a Gloria's Gift charity. I think that's amazing. Mallory has Mal's Pals. And so not only were we able to tell the world about these people's stories, but make sure their legacy lives on and get people and help their stories do good in their own communities. Like Gloria's Gift gives to kids in Hampton who wouldn't be able to get Christmas presents otherwise. Like, that's an amazing thing. And so things like that that keep me going when I look at, like, why did I do all of this? Good or bad, good or bad. There's definitely more good, and I have to focus on that.
You've had a huge impact on lots of people's lives. So, we've joked a little bit, or Alec was talking about, well, was I on Netflix? What's going on there? There have been Netflix documentaries. There have been a Lifetime, Oxygen, lots of movies, lots of documentaries. You have declined to participate in many of them, if not most. You declined to participate in this year's CrimeCon. So I was curious, what is the ethical compass that you follow that leads you to determine whether to participate or decline participation in these various events that have been offered to you?
David, do you want the slide? Okay. So this is my moral compass that I stick. This was so incredibly genius of my husband when we started this podcast in 2021. He had the foresight to say, we need a mission, like we need boundaries. We need to know that we are doing the right thing and we need to stick. So what are they? And at that point, I didn't believe that the podcast was going to go beyond 10 episodes, if that. But he made me do it. And so we were like, give voice to the victims, get the story straight, expose the truth wherever it leads. And if I'm not doing one of those things with my time and with our company, then we shouldn't be doing it. So with getting the story straight, like that could be used for some of the like Netflix things. But at the end of the day, it just didn't feel right. I think when these producers would talk a big talk about they'll fly me to New York City and blah, blah, it just felt weird. It just didn't feel, and I was always so nervous at the beginning that I would participate in something gross and then I would lose my audience. And David was very good about reminding me, like, keep focused on your work. That's their work. And you'll make their shows better. You should just make our show better. Focus on that. And that, it was smart. And I think a lot of things, that's another thing with women. Like, a lot of times, if I didn't have David to guide me, I would have been working for free on all these other people's shows. And, like, I did do one TV show. I did 2020, and it's not a secret. They don't give you any money. I didn't ask for it, but it was a lot of time I committed. It was like basically 2 days of interviews for that TV show. And and especially during when the investigation was that crazy and when things were breaking that much, and when I had a full-time job and was doing the podcast on top of that, to dedicate 2 days for a show that I wouldn't be making any living off of, and that was what was important at the time. Like, how do I dedicate myself so that like we can keep this thing going? And so I had to conserve energy too. That was the thing. But I'm glad with everything that I've turned down, I've been okay with it. I've never watched any of those programs and thought, I wish my face was on there, because I don't.
And Dick and Jim did not have very many people show up at crime cons, so.
I actually watched that last night. There's a video that I actually paid for through the CrimeCon website. I'm curious, of Dick and Jim's talk, and it was, oh my gosh, wow. That their audience was not nice to them.
Oh, really? So they were not.
It got pretty vicious.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, tough crowd. You guys are a lot better.
So your work focuses on shedding a light on the good old boy system and injustices in the system. I think you talk a lot about there being 2 systems of justice in South Carolina. And so I'm curious if you have advice for particularly students in the crowd, but for anybody who, as part of their life goal, is to fight systemic injustices. So any wisdom do you want to impart on those who are here or virtually who are joining us?
I think the biggest thing is stay true to yourself and listen to your gut. I think with women, a lot of times especially, you know that something's the right thing, but everybody else is telling you otherwise. And it's hard to listen to our guts because you have to have the confidence that like, no, but my gut has been so accurate about this. And I'm very proud of that because it's been an experience for me to be able to trust, like, I usually know when something is right or wrong. And with the investigation as to what direction I go into, my gut has led me to a lot of not better places. My gut has just led me in the right direction. And I think that and vulnerability has been huge for me. In the second episode of my podcast, because I put out the first episode and immediately started getting all these emails about how horrible my voice was and how I should hire a voice actor to do the podcast because my voice was so offensive. And I had vocal fry and all these things and was getting a ton of reviews. And I made a choice for the next podcast to open it up and say, I don't want to hear from you. If you think my voice is awful, you don't have to listen. Here's a news flash, guys. And I remember David was like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, this is just going to make people hate you more. And he's always protective. But that was the moment that kind of made the podcast different and made I've heard from a lot of really successful people, like the My Favorite Murder girls who are amazing. They were like, that was the part of the podcast that made me that sucked me in. And a lot of just really awesome women who, again, have gotten similar comments about their voice, their bodies, etc., made them want to listen more. And so I think just the power of vulnerability and to be able to speak up for yourself and to just be real and authentic with your audience will go way, way further than if you follow the rules of mass media and what everybody tells you to do. Yeah.
So this is a time, if you do have questions on those note cards, if you would pass them towards the aisle, and Kelsey, if you don't mind picking up some, and David, perhaps, if you don't mind helping too. I will say I listened to the Cup of Justice this week, and you and Liz started out talking, these are, if Eric is watching,
yeah,
these are
Eric?
Eric Bland.
That's amazing.
Greenery for the set. But you also spent a lot of time, you and Liz, talking about anxiety and depression, and I think that's really important. I talk as a professor with my students a lot about mental health and mental well-being, and I think the more we talk about it, the better we all are.
Yeah, it's funny because every time I make a comment about my mental health or depression, anxiety, etc., there's always at least one troll that says something rude and like, oh, you're just trying to get attention, blah, blah, blah. But it's those trolls that need mental health help the most. Like we all just need to be able to talk about it and be open about it. And what gets you in the worst place is not being able to talk about the things that are bothering you the most. And that's another thing I'm very proud of.
And you have a squad, a great husband, and a crew of folks. And I think this community, cares about and supports you as well. So I'm not doing a lot of vetting here, but there are some interesting questions. I think this was interesting because I remember this from the jailhouse call. Do you think it was huge that Alec told Buster to hunt at Moselle after the murder? That is when I knew he was guilty.
Yeah, that was a part of it. That was one. I remember I was listening with headphones on, and I like ripped the headphones off and was like, did I just hear? And I listened to it over and over again because I was like, that is so disgusting and horrifying. And like talking about mental health, how did Alex have no idea how wrong that was to ask that question and to ask that of his son who just lost his brother and mother to go hunting on at the place where they were murdered? And why does he want that? There was just, it was so weird, but that was a huge clue for us that something was really, really, really wrong with Alex, and he probably did it.
Another question by the same fan. Do you know what SLED found during their investigation, the Stephen Smith case, that led them to reopen it?
I do not, and Sandy doesn't know either.
So here is a nice question about the most rewarding part of being an investigative journalist.
I'd probably just be able to make those phone calls to victims like Sandy of like, your case is being reopened. People are listening to you. Whenever you can make some sort of positive impact in the things that you're reporting on, the people that you're reporting on, and I'm reporting on horrible things in people that are dealing with a lot of trauma, so whenever I can give them any sort of good news, that's definitely worth it. Or that I can see that they're getting good news, that I can see the pressure that the podcast has put on law enforcement to do X, Y, Z, and so any sort of change is what really matters to me and definitely keeps me going.
So you did mention that you have a book coming out. I think if you walked in, you saw a beautiful cover of the book that was designed by David Moses, who is a great voice actor, is part of the podcast. Nice job. What was that process like for you, writing the book? Things you learned about yourself, pros and cons, and I think somebody else asked a question about some advice for writing their first book. But I'm curious what this process has been like for you.
Very, very hard. I won't lie. This was probably the toughest project out of like the podcast and the reporting. Doing the book was just, but it was a different kind of hard because it was really processing traumatic events in my life that, especially with the investigation, there were a lot of points where I would like go through something and then have to write about it like a couple months later and look back on that, and it was forcing me to process things very quickly. Advice is just to do it. I had wanted to write a book my entire life, but never even tried or thought I could do it. And when I got a book deal, that also terrified me because I just can get very in my own head and like, oh my God, how am I going to fill up a book and a podcast and do all these other things?
Yeah, how do you do all that? That is...
Right, and that's why Carolyn Murdaugh's name is on the cover. She's my amazing co-author, and that's another big lesson for everybody. You cannot do it all. Your friends and your coworkers always ask for help, because I was constantly leaning on other people during all of this, and I don't want to ever look like the person that is taking credit for everything. Carolyn is also a journalist, and we just really clicked, and she became my friend who helped me process a lot of grief in my life and made me realize that different parts of the story mattered, and I didn't ever envision myself co-authoring a book, but it worked out so well because a lot of things that I think I would have sat there and thought of as a writer, like, no, that's stupid. I won't put that, no one will care about that. But Carolyn cared about a lot of the things that I didn't think mattered. And I love the book. I'm really, really proud of it, and I'm happy that it's coming out. I'm excited. It's just a lot of anxiety. It's just a lot of building up to a big moment of your life. And now I'm forcing myself to do things like this that I normally wouldn't, so.
And it comes out November 14th, is that correct?
November 14th,
You can
yes.
pre-order it now on Amazon or any of your local booksellers.
Yes.
Any other advice on how to get a copy, or is there any secret back channel? We have to wait. There's not like a box of books
That's a
out there
David
for us.
question.
Nice. Very
Yeah.
nice.
That's gonna be
Excellent.
fun.
So a student had asked if you did internships when you were in college, how many? Do you think they were an important factor in being given so much responsibility straight out of college? In general, advice to students you might have in terms of internships in college?
That's a great question, because I was in my junior year was around the time everybody else was getting internships in the School of Journalism, and I wasn't. I applied and applied and applied, and no newspapers wanted me, and that was a time in my life when I was like, maybe I should switch. I don't know what I'm doing. And I actually ended up interning at a government agency, of all things.
Which government agency do you
It was
remember?
in Kansas City. It was like a government planning agency, and I helped with like their PR department. It had nothing to do with anything, but but that's to show you. But I think in college, professors a lot of times kind of drill into your head that if you don't get the best internship ever, then everything's gonna fall off course, and that's not the case. I had friends that had internships at the New York Times and big newspapers, but they were just fetching coffee. They weren't really getting great experiences. I think what my internship did was just teach me how to work. And I think if you learn that in college, it's the most important thing, and just teach you to keep going.
So the same student asks, I know getting locals to talk was hard because I was the locals. Did you find people more or less likely to talk without a publication behind you at first? And thank you for making the 14th safer.
Oh, that's sweet. I think the biggest thing was it was so taboo to talk about the Murdocks back in 2019. And it was weird. A lot of the information that we found at the very beginning was from weird online blog, fishing blogs and things. People that had, seriously, I'm trying to remember the website, and it shut down randomly one time, but it had straight on accurate information about the Murdaugh family and just all of this, some rumor, of course, but it was hard at the beginning that's very different. People saying things online are very different. and I talk about this in my book of getting my first source, and she was actually a young woman from Hampton. And I always say that, like, women are the reasons why the Murdaugh dynasty fell, because, I mean, my source was Mallory's age, and she was terrified to talk to me. She was so scared to even talk to me over the phone about the Murdocks, and I had to meet her at a coffee shop. And I think back to that and how brave that was of her to go. And she was just had this. I remember her wanting to say. I remember her saying things along the lines of like, "This has to end now. This has to end with our generation. Like this cannot go on any longer. We have to do something." And I always think about how brave that was.
Which is a big burden for somebody that age.
Right. Yeah, and that's what I remember sitting across from her, like, you are like 20
That's
years
amazing.
old. That's amazing that you're thinking of other people and you're thinking of future generations and you're thinking and you realize how important this is.
So this is the final comment of praise. It's not a question, but this comes from Jackie O'Hara from Summerville, South Carolina. I just want to thank you for shining a light on the incestuous relationship between the South Carolina law community, judiciary, legislature. This has been going on for a very long time and needs to be fixed. I appreciate you. And I think that is a nice place to end in terms of you have done an awful lot in not even 3 years, which is just crazy how much has happened in 3 years. And so I think if we could all thank Mandy for the work that she has done.
Thank you.
We're standing for you. So I am really grateful to all of you for coming out tonight, to our virtual viewers who are in the interwebs. Thank you for joining us. And again, thank you, David and Mandy, for being here. And I think we'll be up here for a few minutes and slowly meandering towards the back door. So thank you all.
Thank you guys so much for coming.